Hello everyone, it's Azarelius. I know I'm bad at introducing myself, so I thought I'd introduce myself. But today we're going to watch a very interesting debate between a very brave activist against GMO food named Rachel, and she's gonna be facing off some Monsanto dude, whatever. And yeah, watch and learn.
I want to respond to Mr. Kevin O'Leary's idiotic statement about stupid people protest against Monsanto. While on the Lang and O'Leary show, which aired on CBC May 27th, Kevin O'Leary said to all of us, and I quote, "I have an answer to these people. Stop eating. Then we can get rid of them." Well, I challenge you, Mr. O'Leary, to have me on your show next week, and if you promise not to use the word stupid, then I won't use the word fascist.
That was 14-year-old Rachel Parent throwing down the gauntlet to Kevin. The teen activist is passionate about genetically modified food and, as you just heard, takes issue with a lot of the things Kevin has to say on the subject, including a show that we did some time ago. Rachel's an activist and the founder of Kids' Right to Know. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me here today.
I want to start with how you came to be passionate about this. What was it about GMO that actually drew you in the first place?
Well, originally I had to do a speech for my school, and I really wasn't sure what to do it on. So I was researching these different topics, and I realized that GMOs actually affected everything. So I decided to go with GMOs and researched it more and more, and then eventually I just got so into it protesting and got so into it I started doing speeches for other people.
Who are the other people you're doing speeches for?
I actually go to schools, and I also do speeches at protests and different conferences as well.
Are your parents involved? Is it something that they supported, or was this something that you did all on your own?
I did it, but they support me completely.
Yeah.
You know what a lobbyist is, right?
Yes.
Somebody, okay. Do you think you're a lobbyist for the movement that's against genetically modified foods? Would you call yourself that?
No, I don't think so. And I think that I'm just a part of that movement, and I feel like I'm supporting the youth, really.
And why, when you say Kids' Right to Know, why do you feel it's important? I mean, this is obviously an issue that's a political hot button, right? It's a fight in places like Europe, keeping the foods out of places, labeling them in America. It's all over the place. Why do kids in particular, in your view, need to have an awareness of this?
For sure. I believe it's our future, after all. I mean, if you're going to do something to our food, we should definitely know about it. And we're the ones who might have to live with these consequences. So why not be informed about it?
Do you make the assumption right out of the gate that all kids your age believe that this is a bad thing to experiment with foods to make them better or worse? Is this something that you think everybody thinks is bad?
Not necessarily, but I believe that everyone has the right to know what's in their food. And that's exactly why my whole campaign's about. And that's why I just want GMO labeling, and that way people can make informed decisions about what they want to eat.
Do you worry at all about being used? Kevin sort of alluded to this. There are huge lobby groups on either side of this. The companies that make the GMO foods and grains and the rest of it definitely have powerful lobby efforts, but so do the environmentalists and others. Do you worry about being used at all in this fight?
No, because my own cause is different, I believe, because we're just the youth, and we're a complete part of it, but we're separate in a way because we're fighting not only for our food, but for our future and for our nature and our ecosystem. So I believe that we're completely different in a way, but we add to the group.
Okay, let's drill into the issue. Let's say you weren't as lucky as you are, and you were born in an Asian country, you were 14 years old, your only food was rice that had no vitamin A in it. You're going blind and then you died. 550,000 people your age die that way every year. And a company like Monsanto could come along and offer you a genetically modified rice that includes vitamin A that could save your eyesight and your life. How do you feel about that, Rachel?
Actually, funny you mention this. Golden rice was scrapped because it didn't work. And in order for the average 11-year-old boy to get enough vitamin A from rice, he'd have to eat 27 bowls of rice per day. And another thing is, the reason there's blindness isn't because there's a lack of vitamin A in the rice. It's because their diets are simply rice.
Well, that's the problem. You're saying even if he has to eat 30 bowls of rice, there's no vitamin A in what he's eating now. It's not scrapped, it's still being tested. And the bottom line is there'll be other ways to modify food to save people like that. Should we not be trying these things to help those that are dying, or are you against that too?
Should we be messing with Mother Nature?
Well, what do you say to a child your age that's going to die? What do you say?
I mean, in all reality, because golden rice didn't work, how can we fight for that?
And so you don't want to see any attempts to stop food from being destroyed by insects. I mean, what I'm trying to focus you on is there no merits to this at all from your point of view?
My point of view is just that it should be, first of all, tested a lot more. I mean, it's only tested by the very companies that stand to gain by their approval. So I really think that we should have independent studies and then mandatory GMO labeling. That's my thing. That way we can, as consumers, have informed decisions.
Well, there's two debates going on here. One, you want to see labeling. That's one thing. But are you against modifying food at all? Which one?
I know this sounds radical, but yes, I am against genetically modifying our food.
Rachel, I have a problem with that. That may be causing, or basically giving a death sentence to millions of people around the world that are not as fortunate as you are.
You know that GMOs actually don't have higher yields either.
Look, the point is to stop experimentation in a science like this that has so much promise could be a huge mistake and effectively be a death sentence for those that need higher yields if they can get them, plants that are not susceptible to insects, and indeed have more vitamins that they need to stay alive with.
And I'm completely, you know what, actually, I'm totally fine, and that's completely somebody's decision, whether they want to eat GMOs or not. I'm totally okay with that, so they can keep growing it. That's totally fine, as long as they continue to test and also give us the choice, because it's our right to know.
All right, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to let Kevin O'Leary a little bit more. Stay with us after the break. Kevin and Rachel will face off on the issue of genetically modified food.
Meanwhile, they go to break. I'm going to put out my thoughts and some history to this. First and foremost, genetically modified food could be useful in the sense that rather than having a low vitamin count, etc., it could be boosted to help people, like he said. But that's just a big lie, like most of these things, because Monsanto is another one of these big globalist corporations, and they are in fact containing lots of dangerous substances at times. For example, endocrine disruptors, which we have heard about before, me reading articles about it and blogs, etc., which are actually stating true facts, which have been tested and confirmed since long before. And endocrine disruptors are so disruptive to the hormonal system that it actually makes fishes turn into hermaphrodites and over-sexualizes frogs, etc. You've heard this perhaps before, but one very common and dangerous endocrine disruptor is in fact the female hormone that's being mimicked, or in other words, estrogen mimickers. These estrogen mimickers mimics the female hormone estrogen. And what this does to a man is that it feminizes men. And for example, soy is one very popular genetically modified food that has this attribute, or simply poison. Because this really rocks the man's system. And some people I've tried to enlighten of this, they're like, well, what's so bad with that? What's so bad with men being feminized? Well, first and foremost, they become less like men, like having man tits, being less productive with sperm, which means they will become impotent and sterile and things like that. That's not very fun, because I think most people would like to have children, and for people to get infertile like this by being poisoned by eating this genetically modified food is something that people would not want. And it's quite funny that this soy thing has become sort of a meme on the internet, because memeing is pretty much the best way to get through to people, because it makes politics a lot more funnier rather than having these serious statements, etc. And I think that for people to learn about it in a funnier way will really get the message out stronger. But this is a very serious thing, and it also, most importantly, creates cancer. It creates cancerous tumors, especially within women, because of course women are going to need estrogen more than men, but this is just overdosing. It's like eating steroids, and eventually the breast cancer will come, and that's probably one big reason why so many women nowadays have breast cancer. And naturally, it's not healthy for men either to eat in the long run. And even bodybuilders are very aware of this, because, well, their entire diet is all about knowing what's in their food. And if they're scared as shit out of estrogen mimickers, endocrine disruptors, etc., well, you can bet your ass it's bad, because they're all about eating these steroidal stuff and knowing what's what, eating your potatoes, etc. Because, well, if you look at their bodies, they're not very feminized, right? These big, strong, hulky Arnold Schwarzenegger dudes, they're big and built up. But that's one of the very big key factors with genetically modified food. And should you mess with Mother Nature? I don't think so. I mean, you really need to get off this forced evolution stuff. It's just like the Kalergi plan. Just stop with this mass immigration and force everyone to be the way you want it, because it fits some form of magical book or whatever. Just let people be and evolve as nature proceeds. And just don't tear down ecosystems just as people damn please and all of that. Stop destroying Mother Nature, because eventually we'll end up like Mars or something like that, and people won't be able to survive on the surface of the world. But about that, let's get into history, shall we? But genetically modified stuff, it has existed for quite some time. I mean, for example, flowers and stuff like that. If you go into a flower shop and gonna buy some flowers, most likely every single flower you're gonna see there have been modified. They have not been hardened by nature. I mean, if you're gonna put one of these outside, they're gonna die, because they're modified to look beautiful, not to be hardened by nature and survive, to adapt. You might think they're looking pretty because, well, they look attractive or something like that, and that would be a very good feat for them, and they would attract perhaps insects that would fertilize them, etc. But that's not the case. It has been modified by man. And for example, corn, you know, these yellow big things, they used in fact to be earlier just a small grass sort of looking thing, but thanks to human engineering, they have evolved into these giant yellow things that we can eat, cornflakes and all of that other stuff. But let's get into this big market for genetically modified food, because it has a very big and dark history, I might add. It all starts with John D. Rockefeller's Big Oil, Standard Oil. He owned 90% of the oil refinery business of the world. So you could say it was a quite big monopoly, and he was very rich. Naturally, this was during America's best days. He had his company when the Americans in fact had 0% tax, and he owned 90% of the world's oil refinery. Just imagine how much wealth he accumulated. And of course, he was known as a philanthropist like many other people. And yes, they have their foundations, and you remember George Soros, how he funnels his money through there, and of course he's gonna be able to dodge taxes. But taxes wasn't invented until 1913, which I've spoken about before. He was known to be an environmentalist. He didn't want to waste a single substance in his oil. He didn't want to spill it out into the sea, etc., blah, 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 because he cared much about nature. So he spent a lot of money on studying these substances, what he could do with them, etc. And he was also a very known philanthropist, like I said. Every time he would meet people, he would give them a dollar coin or cent or something like that to be generous. But of course, that's in front of a camera. And he also were very generous and donated a large portion of his wealth. I think they said half of it. But in truth, when people donate money, they expect to get something back from it. I mean, it's an investment more than a donation. Well then, what did John D. Rockefeller donate his money to? Well, it was medical schools and medical centers and things like that. And of course, he puts in one of his own dudes to regulate and control and make sure that the money is being spent well. Well, it sounds logical, right? Because you'd want someone to watch over your huge investments, or, well, make sure that the money would actually come to the right hands, etc., and not being misused. But that's not the case here. They use these people as board directors to direct where the money is gonna be spent, and basically they're changing the entire system. Rather than having things like chiropractors, they would focus on medicine. And of course, medicine is basically everything nowadays. If you're gonna go to a psychiatrist, you're gonna hear about medicine. If you're gonna go to a doctor, they're gonna tell you to take some form of medicine, prescribe it. It's all a big circulation of business. Psychiatrists, doctors, pharmacists, everything. All of the medical practice revolves around medicine nowadays. And it has been born through this. Because they change all the other medical practices, making them like obsolete. Medicine is the ultimate way. I mean, alchemy has always been a huge thing through medicine, but there have been other methods. But they have been sort of stamped out as totally useless and completely unhelpful. While this is not 100% true, but this is how they created their monopolies. And of course, he did not only invest in medicine, he also bought up lots of other companies which revolved around food. And of course, they did food research and things like that, much like his oil. How could they modify and dominate the food market to their will? As we heard in this video, Monsanto was mentioned, and I'm pretty sure that's one of the companies he bought. That's the food company, along with some others. And aerosol, which is responsible for the chemtrails. Oh well, you know, why would anyone spray those chemtrails in the sky? Well, because these are so poisonous that the seeds, the normal seeds for regular food, would not make it. They would die out because it's full of aluminum and things like that. Even mercury and titanium. And these things, they aren't being found on soil. I mean, some apologists who's bought up by rich globalists like these, they would perhaps argue that it's normal to be on the soil. But in truth, to find metallics like these, you have to go deep into the earth, mine it out, refine it, oxidize it, then you can spray it out from planes, and that's how it lands on the soil. And of course, it's very poisonous. These normal seeds, they would not be able to make it. So what would the replacement be for this? Yes, it would be to buy genetically modified seeds that is aluminum resistant. And these aluminum resistant seeds are in fact being patented, which means only they can sell it, which means they have a monopoly, which means if they spray everything and every farm gets, well, killed off this way, everyone will have to buy their seeds. They will have to come to Aerosol or Monsanto, whatever, who sells these seeds in order to be able to grow their crops. And this is the technocratic vision, that no one can live outside the cities, etc. That everyone will have to live within the system. So, for example, people living on islands have seen huge repercussions because of this. There are trees dying, even forests are drying out. It could be a very big reason why we're having such big forest fires during the summers, because the forests simply are dying out. They're being dried out because of these toxins they're spraying out in the sky. These things are being sprayed out mostly in America, in NATO countries, and I even heard reports on China. I've never been in China, so I haven't been able to see it. But I can tell you, that's going on in Sweden 1,000-fold. I mean, they spray that thing all day long nowadays, especially since they had that report on television where they talked about what chemtrails are. Oh, well, it's good for nature, blah, blah, blah. Maybe not in the long term, but it helps to reverse the climate change. We didn't say this because, well, we didn't want it to be so that people would sit in their cars and drive a lot more to emit more gas and blah, 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 carbon dioxides. But the truth is, carbon dioxides have always been in the air, and especially during...
That the Mad Hatter was mad because it represented hatters of the time, and that apparently the guys who made hats used mercury to turn the fur into felt. And they would breathe the mercury, and it would cause brain damage, and hence the Mad Hatter. And that was in the 70s and 80s that I had my young kids, and I, at the same time, was learning that we were supposed to avoid using aluminum pots and pans because there was apparently a connection to autism. So that was the first time for me that I made any connection between heavy metals and human health. And then a few years ago, I learned that there was an unnatural amount of aluminum in the soil, and that there was a program spraying aluminum and other heavy metals up into the atmosphere. And so I wanted to check it out. And that's the first way that chemtrails showed up for me.
The earlier stages of the Earth. That's why the dinosaurs were so huge, because they consumed much more carbon dioxides, and it helped their bodies to become much larger compared to the ones we have today. I mean, what you see from the remnant from the dinosaurs are just small birds and lizards. But the truth is, it's worsening it. And there's so much more detail to the chemtrails. But for the sake of the genetically modified food, we must move on. But you see here, they create this environment. They create and shape the future of our food industry, of our medical industry, because they can get in here and have a monopoly.
Imagine the government involved with social engineers in our biology. They hate us so much. And the stupid idiots that work at Viacom and that work at Esquire and that work at all these places in Gawker, their kids are going to die of cancer young. They're going to die young. They're going to have neurological disorders. And they're so cowardly that when they're dying, they're not even ever going to admit the globalists killed them. They're not going to go look at the actuaries, the numbers, the admissions, the White House science czars, eco-science. They're not going to read any of it. I'll tell you who is going to read it. Not just somebody who won in open karate championships around the world against people a lot bigger and meaner than him, but somebody who successfully launched his own genre of films, somebody who launched his own line of exercise equipment and successful businesses, somebody that has just done so many accomplishments, it's crazy, and who produced the most hilarious comedy series, Walker, Texas Ranger, in history. And believe me, inside baseball, they know it's entertaining, it's fun, has a family values message, but is also entertaining and funny. People that can't laugh at themselves have a big problem. Chuck Norris is an amazing person. Chuck Norris takes on chemtrails. Martial arts legend talks about sky criminals waging war on our atmosphere and our health. And the point is, you can't stop the signal. Merle Haggard, Prince, Chuck Norris, all of them. All listeners of this show, by the way. But let's expand on that. We've confirmed Merle Haggard was as well. I remember Willie Nelson like 10 years ago, sitting there playing chess with him. He goes, I know you talk about the chemtrails. I notice they stay up there longer than they used to. What are they doing? Changing the weather? The point is, you can't fool everybody, okay? And it's admitted they're doing these secret tests. They just classify the details. It's called geoengineering. So the good news is this medical, scientific, global takeover is now getting ready to come down. And why would anybody want to work in this deception and get talking points from criminals in the government to go out and wage war against your own fellow humans?
And steer the very education and scientific facts to their benefit. While there are no deniability that medicine can be totally life-saving for some people, it is also being used as drugs. People who simply doesn't need these medicines in the first place are being propped up with these medicines, and then they can't get out of it. They need the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And once they start to take these medicines, they will be on them for the rest of their lives. And they will have to spend thousands and thousands and thousands on this. And of course, these big corporate giants, they're earning billions on this. I mean, I've been against medicine for a long time. And to just research this and watch documentaries of people also having taken these medicines and speaking out against this. It's just horrible to see a father of a 4-child family along with his wife, while his family sits on the couch, relaxed. They don't need to take any medicine or anything like that. They're calm. But the father, he took some antidepressants and things like that, and it evolved. He was just in such pain, so he couldn't sit still. He had to move, so he moved around behind them, behind the couch, all stressed up, and it just looked disturbing. And the fact that these suicidal people are being told to take antidepressants. Well, if you read on the antidepressants, they create anguish. And anguish is the very reason why people commit suicide in the first place. It's a lack of touch of reality. It's a lack of personality with people. People need love in general to want to live. And if they lack these things, if they feel out of place, they will get lost. And by taking these medicines, people will think, hey, I'm gonna get better. But when they take them and don't feel like they're getting better, well, obviously, they're gonna feel a lot worse. And that's why antidepressants and things like that only works 50% of the time when it comes to suicidal people. So they have manufactured this market. They have tailored it to their design. And I mean these people, the Rockefellers, because they are mentioned as Rockefellers, because John D. Rockefeller had 5 children. And these 5 children became some of the world's most powerful people. One, for example, Nelson, I think his name was, he was the vice president of the United States of America. So he was a very big political figure. And David Rockefeller, which is perhaps more known, is known to have founded the United Nations.
It is happening in New York City. In an age even of computer communication and international communication and the ability to communicate with the people by fax and in all kinds of different ways, it still is important to be somewhere, to be in a place, to see people, to deal with them and to be face-to-face with them. And New York City gives you that opportunity. The Rockefeller family understood that and foresaw that New York was the inevitable home for the United Nations, the geographical center for the voice of humanity. In a brief video introduced by the United Nations Secretary General Boutros Ghali and containing some exceptional footage, the connection between the United Nations, New York City, and the Rockefeller Foundation is clearly drawn. So if we could play the video, I really would appreciate your watching it. I think you're going to enjoy it very, very much.
On the eve of the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, it is important to recognize more than just an event. Arriving at the critical juncture in history, this anniversary holds immense potential for the peoples of the world. To appreciate, preserve, and strengthen the achievements of the United Nations, to examine new challenges which require creative action, and most importantly, to chart a course for the future. In doing this, it is appropriate to reflect and to draw strengths from the early history of the United Nations. The Rockefeller family embodied the idealism of those years.
John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s early backing of the League of Nations in the 1920s demonstrated the Rockefeller family's commitment to international peaceful cooperation. Grants promoting investigations into the narcotics trade and the traffic in women and children, and his endowment of a League of Nations library were evidence of his moral and financial support. While the League of Nations floundered and ultimately failed, its ideals lived on. As World War II was drawing to a close, a new world organization was conceived, the United Nations. This historic footage shows how the concept became reality.
The idea, initiated at the famous Yalta Conference in the closing days of World War II, was to be followed through to completion by the delegations of some 50 nations, including that of the United States, shown here at a preliminary meeting in Washington. April 25th, 1945, while the war was still raging overseas, the free nations of the world assembled for the first meeting of the historic conference from which was to evolve the final drafting of the Charter. The President spoke to the assemblage from a radio microphone in Washington, D.C.
The world has experienced a revival of an old faith in the everlasting moral force of justice. At no time in history has there been a more important conference or a more necessary meeting than this one in San Francisco. You members of this conference are to be the architects of a better world. In your hands rests our future. By your labors at this conference, we shall know if suffering humanity is to achieve a just and lasting peace. If we do not want to die together in war, we must learn to live together in peace.
On June 25th, 1945, the Charter was signed in a formal ceremony by each of the 50 nations present at the conference. Out of the chaos of World War II had come a global brotherhood that carried within its legislative structure the seeds of world peace for the generations to come.
Many tasks were set before the young United Nations, including the resettlement of World War II refugees, the drive to secure fundamental human rights, the struggle to limit the growing proliferation of atomic weapons, and the task of finding a permanent home for the organization. The world looked on as a search was initiated.
Arriving in New York to choose United Nations headquarters, delegates from 7 nations are welcomed by Grover Whalen. They must choose a site within the New York or Boston areas. The committee calls on President Truman at the White House before proceeding to inspect locations. The eastern United States will soon hold the new capital of the world.
Nelson Rockefeller, a former member of the U.S. delegation to San Francisco, was appointed by New York City Mayor O'Dwyer to interest the UN in building on the 1939 World's Fairgrounds in Flushing Meadow. When the UN rejected this proposal, the Rockefeller family considered offering part of their own estate, Pocantico, and adjoining properties for the headquarters site. No decision had been made when the UN convened in the fall of 1946. The Rockefeller family was more concerned than ever with bringing the UN to New York City. News accounts from the period convey the atmosphere.
As the weary delegates of 54 nations prepare to end their meeting, the world takes stock of recent weeks, highlighted by the beginnings of cooperation. Hopeful signs are the unanimously passed resolution on armaments reduction and atomic controls. And there was big news in the last days as headlines told another story. The gift of a site by John D. Rockefeller Jr. for a permanent world capital in New York. Quickly accepted, the strip along Manhattan's East River is valued at $8.5 million. An ideal site for skyscraper headquarters, the 6-block area extends from 42nd to 48th Street.
The Rockefeller family formally presented its gift to the UN in March of 1947.
The future of this country and the lives of our children and our children's children are interwoven with the success of the United Nations. In it lies the hope of the people of the world. My father considers it a privilege to have had a part in the development of its permanent home. I'm glad to hand you, Mr. Lee, my father's check.
Thank you, Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller, Mayor Dwyer, the United Nations extends its sincere thanks to you and to your father for this magnificent gift. We intend to go ahead and create on the East River side a dignified and appropriate headquarters for the United Nations, which will stand for generations to come as a great monument to peace and security. Your family can be proud of its contribution to this cause.
Thank you very much.
The Rockefeller gift changed the course of history and brought the United Nations to New York City. It is a gift which gave practical and moral support to the young United Nations, thus enabling it to succeed where the League of Nations had failed. It is a gift which furthered the United Nations mission to help save succeeding generations from the scourge of war.
And the Rockefeller family's commitments to the United Nations did not end with this exceptional gift. It continues to the present day, and it is personified by David Rockefeller, whom we honor for his dedication to democratic principles, for his dedication to development, and for his dedication to international peace.
Though he died last year, I think, but rest assured, their globalist corporations are in good hands with the globalists. And they also spoke for population control. In the start it was eugenics, but if you know what eugenics are, you're gonna probably figure out that, oh no, that doesn't really sound right. So they just changed the name to population control because it sounds far more nice. So yeah, that's what this is. It's a eugenics plot against us to lower the populations and really control where we live, how our behaviors are going to be. And really, I mean, it will be like Nazi and Soviet style control, that anyone that is being against the government, etc., the system, is gonna be taken into a mental hospital and become drugged up because they're mentally ill. How could you criticize our mighty Hitler? How could you criticize our mighty Stalin or whoever this globalist control and leader are going to be? because that's what you get as an answer. I feel bad. Go get help. Meet a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist says all the normal things that any normal person would say. There's nothing new there. But he points you to medicine. And if they're gonna take you to a hospital where you're gonna get some extreme help, where you will feel much better, like they say, all they're gonna try and do is try to make you admit that you're sick and that you need medicine. Do you see the pattern? It all comes back to medicine. No matter what it is, they're gonna come back to medicine. And of course, I mean, if it's not gonna be about medicine, we're gonna have vaccinations. And when we walk in these food stores, basically most of the food are going to be genetically modified, and we're not even gonna know about it. And I remember that yellow rice in school. I never liked it. I always went with the white. But that white rice might as well have been genetically modified. Because organic food, as we heard from a report from Inforce not too long ago, 50% of Americans' organic food could in fact be not organic food. Because lots of pesticides are being sprayed upon food to keep insects and stuff like that away from it. But they're known to have endocrine disruptors, or if someone wants to be more specific, estrogen mimickers. Lots of plastics, and we got a huge plastics industry, are prominent estrogen mimickers. So even if you would buy organic foods to avoid the genetically modified foods to try and keep your family healthy, it is a big chance that you would actually fail and buy something that had been sprayed on, not by chemtrails, it's pesticides, it's far more different, but still both are poisonous. Of course, genetically modified is also poisonous. So even if you would try to avoid eating these non-organic foods, it's a big chance you would still buy it. So we're all under their spell, so to say, because we're all consuming their poisons that are being forced upon us. Because, well, if they own the industry, they own the industry. They make it all happen. And since the Gilded Age with the technological revolution and the Great Depression, the competition died out. From everything, from banks to farmers, I mean, they just quit because, well, when the machines came, well, having that many farmers was unnecessary. Farmers quit. And when the Great Depression happened, even more quit because of how the depression just drained everyone of their wealth. So people had to find fortunes elsewhere. And our radio stations here in Sweden, for example, they are being very prominent propagandists. They're trying to always go with the flow of saying, hey, why should we have Swedish farmers? It's so bad. I mean, it's far cheaper to buy food from Brazil, to buy meat from Brazil. And of course, they have the Zika virus and all of these sorts of things. And if it's going to be a war, well, how the hell are we going to get food? Starve to death. Well, of course, they are not going to take any counterpoints because they're going to prop up this propaganda against people and make everyone aware that, oh, well, it's much better to just prepare for ourselves to lose all of our farms. We're going to lose our Swedish good farmers that are actually producing very healthy and productive food. But rather, would they buy from large corporations elsewhere and from these other third world countries? Because, well, that would be a lot better for the rest of the world if we would do that, and blah, blah, blah. You can imagine the multicultural nonsense. And naturally, we will lose jobs by doing this. But no, they won't even consider those things. They will consider this as a good act. It's all beneficiary to remove our farmers. We don't need farmers in Sweden. And, well, of course, with these chemtrails, it's just a softening up mechanism to prepare us to lose everything we have in our country to make us dependent on others. Because being self-providing is a bad thing nowadays, because everyone should live on subsidies and everyone should live as a slave to the state. It's far more better for everyone to be submissive. And if you ask anyone in the mainstream or whatever, they're gonna say, hey, go seek some help as a psychiatrist and get your medicine. It comes back to the same things over and over again. I mean, have you ever considered it when you're gonna talk to people or listen to the mainstream views? Well, they should get some medication, they should get some help, blah, 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 blah. It's the same thing over and over. And these things with food and medicine, because if you consider it, food is also a natural herb, so to say. You need the food. And it's quite sad, really, but animals have also been modified. And it's one of the most horrific examples is the steroid cow, where they put steroids on cows so they would grow more beef, and they could not give birth to their own children because, well, they had so much muscle that they could not get the calf out of them. So they had to do a C-section to get the calves out. Horrible, and a misuse of our human ingenuity. It's great sin against Mother Nature to believe that we could be gods, to create and force evolution to benefit us. Evolution should come naturally, through time, but to force it upon others, it's not about forcing it upon yourself, making the choice that, yes, I want this genetically modified meat on myself or something like that. No, you force it upon others. And that's when you cross a very dangerous line. And eventually, we'll all have to accept it. And of course, we have the human chimeras, but let's not get into that. But it's always good to mention. And to finish this off, the Rockefellers, with their population control, they have loaned people money. I mean, big money to third world countries such as Africa, where they would be able to buy equipment for their farms, etc., and be able to grow food and all that. But of course that costs a lot of money, and they don't have that sort of money, so they loaned it through the UN with their own private bank, and then they lent them the money. But of course these people were not able to pay the loan back. But of course these people knew, because this is naturally bad for a bank. If people can't pay back, the bank will go bankrupt, because they are dependent on that people will be able to make the pay to be able to pay off their debts. That's what banks are dependent on, to gain money. But of course the Rockefellers are smarter than that. They know that, well, if you can't pay off your debt, then, well, sell us your valuable resources with a 20% cut on the price, or something like that, until they pay it off. And that will take some extreme time, and that will impoverish the country, because the deals won't be fair, they will just go backwards, and they will be controlled this way. That's how the third world are being slaves to these rich corporations. And that's how these rich corporations, in other words, globalists, because the globalists are corporates, bankers. And that's how they control the world. And that's why they want to bring in all these migrants here, because they want to make the first world into the third world. And believe me, once they have made Europe, etc., and America into third world countries, which they will control this way, just like they control Africa and South America, etc., then they will go to other countries like Japan, South Korea. But it is very likely that they would end up in a war, as America would have to dismantle their large military that's abroad, which shouldn't be abroad. And the South Korean would have to deal with the North Koreans, the Chinese would deal with the Japanese, etc. You can imagine any sort of crazy scenario, but that's most likely what would happen. These other countries that's really first world countries nowadays, they would crumble because there would be no alliance throughout the world, and everyone would just fall under this song of globalism. But if you ask me what could I do, because we're breathing in poison as they do these chemtrails, there are pesticides in our food is genetically modified, everything we consume contains these endocrine disruptors, I don't want that for me or my family, what can I do? I mean, I'm at a loss myself. First and foremost, you could try and buy ecological food. It's perhaps a little bit more expensive, but perhaps it would be ecological, and perhaps that in the long run would help you. But I would suggest eating different types of food, because, like the girl said, they only ate rice. That's the wrong thing. If you eat one and the same food, you will eventually die. It's a proven fact. You can't eat the same food every day. But if you mix it up, it's probably gonna be far better. But be mindful of what you eat. For example, soy, it's full of estrogen mimickers. It's very bad stuff. Soy is the last thing you should eat or drink, because they have like soy milks and stuff like that. And there's a famous person who drank so much of it every day that, you know, he looked like a fat slob walking around with fat everywhere. And we do know that fat and stuff like that, that's more towards the female autonomy, because men generate more muscle mass while women generate more fat, because the fat is very necessary as they're gonna have children, etc. And not to mention the form of their breasts and stuff like that. So be mindful, that's what I would say. And if you can, be brave like this young girl and dare to protest. That's what I could say, really, about these things. Make people aware, protest, and read up on this subject, and eat with common sense. But I think they're coming back for a second round. Let's see what they have to say.
About 90% of all corn, cotton, and soy planted in the U.S. has been genetically modified. The use of these types of seeds around the world is widespread and growing. Proponents say they help farmers plant more with less and ultimately help increase yield to feed the world. Critics say people need more information about food that's been altered for health and safety reasons. Rachel Parent is a teen activist and founder of Kids' Right to Know. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
I want to talk about sort of this fine distinction, and Kevin was raising this before, but is it an all or nothing question? Because we, throughout history, whether it's, you know, the breeding of animals or, you know, introducing things like hothouse tomatoes, we do change the way things are grown, and we even change their makeup, their color, their, you know, the content of them. We just do it more slowly outside of a lab. Is there some room to improve things scientifically if we safety test them, if we actually go through the same kind of FDA studies you have to do with a drug?
Well, I think a lot of people also confuse hybridization with GMOs. Yep. And just to clarify, GMOs, it's a genetically modified organism, and it's where they take the DNA from a species such as it can be like bacteria, virus, animal, or even from a plant, and they insert it into the DNA of another species to introduce a new trait. For instance, a common trait is pesticide producing. So they'll make the crops pesticide producing, but they haven't adequately tested, and Monsanto's longest study is 90 days. That really doesn't determine how long-term it's going to affect our health, the environment, and even our entire ecosystem. Yeah.
You know, saying Monsanto's testing in 90 days is a little mislabeling it, because many other organizations, including it sounds like some ones you're involved in, do much more testing. So a product comes to market, many people test it, including the government. So Monsanto knows that about food.
Actually, can I just, in Health Canada nor the FDA do any independent studies, and they rely only on the very studies provided by the companies that stand to gain by their approval, like Monsanto.
There's other companies as well, right?
Yes, but they all do their own independent.
Are there organizations on the other side of this debate that do? Is there any? What would the testing look like? In other words, what kind of testing would be reliable to say this is okay for the environment or the ecosystem?
Definitely, we need a long-term study to determine if it's safe for not only our ecosystem but our health as well.
Yeah.
But Rachel, we're in a long-term study. You're eating genetically modified food, whether you like it or not.
We're the lab rats.
And we have been for decades. And I think what I'm trying to get at about your point of view, and look, everybody has the right to have one, but to say that there's no merit to having science try and make yields better or foods better or help people's problems on a dietary basis sounds a little extreme. And I'm wondering, as time passes, because I have a case study in my own home. I had a daughter your age who, at the same time, she was vehemently opposed to this. She decided to make a documentary film, and she went through the process of researching it. I'm going to show you a clip of it, and she was just like you. She doesn't feel that way today anymore.
You know, actually, Kevin, I have seen this video, and I don't necessarily agree with all the points that are made. And I do have some information that I can share with you after
She went
about
at it from both sides. She didn't make a claim at the beginning that she had a point of view. She said, I'm going to examine both sides. And I wish for you the same thing, because to stay on a point
and you know, actually, I have examined both sides, but I choose to follow this
side. And you would prefer to see no more work in GMOs.
Not necessarily this, but I do believe if they're going to work, not only that they have to test it, but at least give us the right to know what's in our food.
Okay, different issue around labeling. I think everybody gets that, and I think the trend in society now is more transparency, and you're going to get labeling. Fine, okay. But I'm trying to explore whether you have any flexibility in your thinking about the merits of science and food. It doesn't sound like you do, and I find that not good, actually.
Actually, you know what? If they want to experiment, okay, but that brings me back to the labeling. At least give us the choice.
The truth is, though, as we know, virtually every product in the grocery store would then be labeled GMO. One danger that you'd face is we would just become immune to that label. We would accept that it's everywhere. As Kevin says, we've been exposed to it for decades, and we'd shrug and say, well, it may be killing the monarch butterflies, but, you know, I've been eating it for 10 years, so I'm not going to stop now. Are you worried about that aspect of this?
Not necessarily, because at least then they have the choice if they want to eat it. But the people like me will find the odd...
Well, we don't really. I mean, I don't have a choice to avoid GMO corn if I live in America, right? Because it is all genetically modified.
It's pretty much all...
So if I'm going to eat corn or any corn-based products or any corn flour or anything that's derived from it, I'm eating this stuff. So that's a pretty tough choice to make.
I mean, there are the odd ones that aren't, and that's why we do want labeling. That way we do know which ones are.
You know, you're very articulate. That's a positive. What I'm concerned about and what I'm exploring with you is whether you've become a shill for a group that wants to use you because you're young, you're articulate, you're getting lots of media, and I'm happy for you on that. But I'm trying to figure out whether you really deep down believe this, that you should stop all scientific approach to looking at food, even if it has long-term benefits down the road for people that really are not as lucky as we are in North America, that don't have access to all the protein we do. That can't be your position. I don't believe it.
It's not necessarily that, and this brings me again back to the labeling, because I mean, at least test it properly, adequately. That way we know as the consumer if it's safe. And you know what? Okay, whoever wants to eat it or whoever wants to experiment with it, go ahead. But
okay, Rachel, I give you the labeling. Let's say we mandate everything's labeled. Got that. Would you allow companies like Monsanto and many others to try and modify foods to the benefit of all human beings everywhere?
Are you anti-science? I guess
yes or
is the
no?
question.
I'm not anti-science, but I'm for responsible science and ethical progress. Science that's proven safe by not the very same companies that stand to gain by their approval.
And I'd like to say we have no evidence, and we may want to withdraw the accusation that you're a shill. What you are is clearly a passionate 14-year-old, and we need more of those in the world.
I've always thought that as people age, because you can have a vehement position at one time in your life, but when you start to see the evidence on the other side of it over time, you may change your minds. And from my point of view about you, I hope that happens.
Is that likely to happen, Rachel?
No.
All right. We got to leave it there, but we do appreciate you being here with us.
Thank you.
Rachel Parent.
This was a very enlightening debate, I must say. I think Rachel held her ground very well, and for each and every single of that guy's rhetorics, she was able to counter. And I mean, this guy she was debating, this Monsanto supporter, or whatever we're supposed to call him, because I don't remember his name. I don't even want to remember his name. He was so poisonous. Like he tried to paint a picture on Rachel that she was another one of those who just wants to destroy for other people. She doesn't care about a human life that would suffer because of this revolutionary, genetically modified food, that she only wanted to destroy it because it didn't fit her political will, etc. That she was the bad guy. That's what he basically wanted to say throughout this video. And at times I noticed, for example, when he used that example of his own daughter, that she changed her opinion, etc. That's like one of their perhaps more common sense thing, that, you know, maybe you feel like this, but once you see more evidence, you'll change your mind. Because that is the one and only good thing I really could find from this dude. It's because it's a very good example of how people could get stuck in their own ideology and their own thoughts. They will be so caught up that I'm right on this, they're wrong on this. I'm right on this, they're wrong on this. Because, for example, if you come to someone like me and you're gonna tell me, hey, I think you're wrong on this because of this, and, you know, give some form of evidence to what I'm saying that I'm wrong on, then I would study it, and I would admit, yeah, I was wrong on this. Thank you for correcting me. But some people are just stuck in their ways, and no matter what you're going to tell them, they're still going to just constantly say, for example, the guy I argued with after the Stockholm attack from the terrorist, and I kept showing him lots of radical Muslims and stuff like that, Muslims in general, that wants to kill the infidels, you know, the Christians, people like me, and Jews, blah, blah, blah. That they're really full of hate, and their system is a theological system that they can't get out of, and it demands these things. It controls the people. That's what Islam is. And he was no, these people are not Muslims, even though the clip clearly stated that they should kill infidels, they should stone people to death for adultery. And he was like, no, they're not real Muslims. Like, what the hell is a real Muslim then? You're a hateful person. Like, is that really your best arguments? That's pretty much why I don't respond to comments unless there's something you could relate to or joke about, because otherwise you're gonna get into these long debates, because no matter how much fact and evidence you try to provide to these people, they would constantly be angrier and angrier and accuse you of things. And like, what have I done? The only thing I'm trying to do with my videos is to help educate and teach people. But if they want to throw that back into my face and say I'm some dangerous guy that wants to kill people, like some Hitler, well, then they're actually pretty unstable people, because I have no such intentions. I'm a normal guy that wants to create a family and have a nice life, you know. But when you get surrounded by Arabs that threatens your life and stuff like that, it doesn't get very fun. And of course, you should do your civil duty and partake in the democracy. And that's what I'm doing. I'm just trying to reach audiences abroad, because I do see that these problems are abroad. It's not just in Sweden, it's not just in Switzerland, it's not just in America, it's not just in South Africa, it's not just in Australia, it's not just in Japan, it's not just in Arabia, it's not just in one place in the entire world. It's all over the world problems that will become everyone's problems eventually. Whether you like to believe it or not, China may be one of the most homogeneous countries in the world, but eventually it will become just as multicultural as, well, Europe. So it's just a matter of time. Because you can see your town one day being homogeneous of German people. But in the next year, it might be full of Arabs, because of the new immigration policy they put in place. It takes just a few years and you'll see more mosques than churches in your hometown. It goes fast. But nevertheless, I want to share on to Rachel's work here, and I don't know what she's doing today, but I really hope she has been continuing working on informing people and trying to fight back against this GMOs, because she certainly has talent. And really, most people could do these things like she does. It's just that people don't have the spine. People don't want to take the time to actually study these things and, you know, take a stand. People generally don't have the will to fight for freedom. I don't know how old she is today, but I don't know, this clip was around 2013 perhaps, or something like that. And well, the years have passed since then, and I bet she's gonna do well in college and all of that. And it would be a true blessing for America and for people in general that people like this would be able to dare take a stand. It's a girl, or perhaps a woman nowadays, that is really worth being proud of. That I might say. But with these people like George Soros, with their open societies and gonna proclaim themselves to be generous philanthropists, well, you always gonna have people claiming they are one thing, but on the other side of the coin, they're gonna be the most selfish bastards there are. Because, in truth, George Soros doesn't care about the social consequences, because he was only there to make money. That's a real quote from him. And that goes also for these people like the Rockefellers. They may proclaim themselves to have the most generous father in ever history, but then again, these donations wasn't as much of donations as people might like to believe, because it was much more of investments, and these investments are going hand in hand with the globalist agenda and will still attack us for generations to come, if not into the end of our generations. But in the meanwhile, this is where I get off.